Okay. All right. So my name is Alyssa Yesko. I'm the director of the Pathways into Education Center. This is our second session that we're holding of summer virtual orientation sessions that we're using to introduce some of our new graduate students to all of the services available at UAlbany. So today we have our guests from the Disability Resource Center here at UAlbany who are going to give you a wonderful presentation, letting you know all about what they do. So thank you, Carrie and Jonathan, for being here today. If you want to introduce yourselves and let us know a little bit about your office, that'd be great. Oh, Carrie, you're muted.
I did click it.
Okay.
You'd think after 15 months that I would have this down. My name is Carrie Snyder. I am the Assistant Director for Student Accommodations and Supportive Services, so SAS for short. And I have been working at the DRC for 7 years now. John?
I'm Jonathan White. I'm the Assistant Director of the Disability Resource Center for Alternative Testing and Assistive Technology, or AT, as we like to call it. I've been working for the DRC in this capacity for about 2 years, but a few years ago, I was also the grad student in the DRC. And before we keep going, can I quickly confirm, is everyone seeing the PowerPoint slide up, or are we seeing, okay, good.
Well, we see the
have you seen the presenter view?
Yeah.
Okay, I was afraid of that. One moment, please.
Please hold.
There we go.
Yay.
Full slide, okay. So Carrie, I'll let you take it away.
Okay, thank you. So this is our presentation that is specifically aimed at grad students and talking about for grad students themselves who have disabilities, for adjunct instructors, and for grad students who are going to be working with students with disabilities, whether it's as teaching assistants or just throughout your grad student responsibilities in general. So first of all, we just want to introduce you to who we are at the Disability Resource Center. Some people may not be familiar with us, so we just want to give you a little introduction. So the boring stuff, our mission. The Disability Resource Center supports and empowers students by cultivating an accessible and inclusive living and learning environment for the university's programs, services, and activities. And we look at this as a student-centered approach, which is facilitated by determining reasonable accommodations, assisting with the development of college survival skills, fostering self-advocacy, and educating the university community. So basically, our goal is to ensure that every program and service that students come in contact with at the university is going to be accessible. And then our vision is to ensure an all-inclusive campus community that's accessible to everyone. So there are laws that have been put in place to protect people with disabilities, and these laws do carry over into the college environment. So the two main laws that come into play in a college setting are the Americans with Disabilities Act of 1990, which is titled the ADA, and that was actually reauthorized as the ADAAA. But basically we just call it the ADA for short. And then the Rehabilitation Act of 1973, which was well before most of you were born, not me, unfortunately, which Section 504 of that is really what we refer to. So we just call it Section 504. These are both civil rights laws, and they provide legal protection against discrimination for people with disabilities. Any programs or businesses that receive federal, state, or local funding have to comply with these laws. So as a public college, as a public university, we are receiving that type of funding. So we do fall under the purview of both of these laws. Now, it's important to recognize that these laws guarantee access. They don't guarantee success. So that's a little bit different than the K through 12 setting. So we're making sure that people have access, equal access to their education. We guarantee that they're going to succeed. So they need to put in the effort to do that, but we're going to make sure that they have access to the same things as their non-disabled peers. So when we're looking at who should register with the DRC, this is not an exhaustive list, but we're talking about anybody who has a documented disability or diagnosis, as well as students who had an IEP or 504 plan in high school. Disabilities do not have to be visible. I have 2 invisible disabilities for which I was registered with the DRC when I was a student here at UAlbany. So we do have a list of possible diagnoses for which people could be registered with the DRC, such as ADHD, learning disabilities, anxiety, depression, diabetes, Crohn's, IBS, chronic migraines, fibromyalgia, chronic Lyme, sickle cell anemia, epilepsy, and hearing loss. I went through that really quickly, but we want to remind people that that's not an exhaustive list. Now, we also offer assistance with temporary disabilities that may require academic adjustments. So suppose you break your wrist on your dominant hand, and that makes it difficult to fill out Scantron sheets or to write for exams. We can help out with that. If a student receives a concussion, we can help out with accommodations for that. So it's not just for permanent disabilities or diagnoses, but it's also for temporary ones. So our services fall under 3 main categories. The first is academic accommodations, and these are the things that people mainly know us for. Things like extended time on tests and less distracting locations. Electronic text, maybe a student has a processing disorder, or for example, I have chronic migraines and sometimes reading for long periods of time can be difficult for me. So I'll get electronic copies of books so that they can be read out loud for me. Assistive technology in class or on exams. Preferential seating, maybe sitting close to the board and where the professor is, or sometimes sitting in the back if you need to be able to leave class for some reason for a brief amount of time. Priority registration, so that you can make a schedule that's going to work with maybe medication that works better at certain times of day. Sign language interpreters or CART services. CART is real-time captioning that will happen, for example, on your laptop so that you can see what the teacher is saying. Or adaptive furniture. Maybe you need a lower desk in a classroom, or maybe you need special furniture in the dorm room. We also do individual services, academic check-in appointments. So somebody can come in and meet with us once a week or every other week and talk about how things are going in classes. Appointments for study skills, time management, all of those fall under the category of what I like to call academic coaching. We don't actually provide tutoring services. We don't do content related coaching, but we do coaching about how to be a better student. We also do accessibility tours. So when people come on campus, we show them where, now we have the elevator right on the podium, but we used to show them how they could get down to the lecture halls by going through the PAC or going through arts and sciences. We show them where various elevators are in different buildings. Assistance with advocacy if students are needing assistance with that as well. And then we also do housing accommodations, talk to students about service animals and emotional support animals. And again, this list is also not exhaustive. So if anybody asks you, or if you know somebody who needs to register with the DRC, it's a 2-step process. We need documentation of the disability. And on our website, we provide information about what that entails. But usually it's either documentation from their high school or from a treating professional. And then they would make an appointment with us. And then we would have either an in-person interview or a Zoom interview or over the phone to discuss how their diagnosis or disability affects them academically, or if we're talking about housing accommodations in the res hall, and then talk about what would be the appropriate accommodations for that. So we prefer that students register as soon as possible, because that way we can ensure that they have accommodations from the minute that they need them. Now, understanding that a student can come and register with us at any time. We have students registering with us throughout the semester, including right up to the week before finals. But accommodations are not retroactive. So if a student waits until the week before finals to register with us, their accommodations are only going to be in place for those final exams. So I have a lot of students who will come to me and they'll have been struggling all semester. And by the time they register with me, the second to last week or the last week of the semester, there's nothing that I can do about the struggles that they've had so far throughout the semester. I can only help them with the time that they have left that semester and then with upcoming semesters. So if somebody comes to us early in the semester, then we can ensure that they have accommodations in place to help them throughout. So as an instructor or a TA, these are tips that you can have for an inclusive classroom, how you might know if a student needs accommodations, and what you can do as part of our alternative testing program. So some general best practices. We want to make sure that you have an accessibility statement in your syllabus. And we actually have on our website, and you'll be getting a copy of this PowerPoint. You can click on that link. It talks to you about what our reasonable accommodation policy is. And then there's a sample accessibility statement that you can put on your syllabus. Encourage students with disabilities to come and talk to you about their accommodations in private. And you'll be getting from students that are already registered with us an email with their accommodations in it. If you have any questions about anything disability related, regardless of if a student has provided you with a disability accommodation letter, or maybe you're like, you know what, I'm going to be showing a video in class and it's not captioned. And how do I go about making sure that it has captions? Or how do I go about making sure that my class is more accessible? Reach out to us. We're happy to help you out with that. Now, we do ask that you not put on your syllabus, and there are still some professors doing this. You need to inform me of accommodations by the second week of class. That's a popular deadline that they put. That's actually something that the Office of Civil Rights would not uphold if a student were to protest that. There's no deadline for students to identify with us as having a disability to get accommodations. And therefore, if they came to us at midterms, then they would be able to inform you at midterms that they have an accommodation. But there's two caveats to that. As I mentioned before, the accommodations aren't retroactive, so they can't come at midterms and say, well, you know, I get extended time on exams now, so I get to retake the 2 exams that we already have. Can't do that. The other thing is they need to give you reasonable notice. So if a student registers with us on Monday and you have a test on Tuesday, they can't tell you Monday night at 9 o'clock that they need extended time on a test Tuesday morning at 8 o'clock. So they do need to give you some warning. So some classroom etiquette. And a lot of this is just being aware of what you're saying and practicing some cultural competence. But for example, if you need to make an announcement to the class where you might be wanting to address students with disabilities, keep it general. So for example, when I'm teaching and I talk about a test that I'm going to be giving, and I say I'll be dropping the test off to the DRC for students who need to take it, I say it exactly like that. And I make sure that I don't make eye contact with the students who I know are registered with the DRC. If you need to speak to a specific student, even if it's about something like that, like the fact that you need to drop their test off to the DRC, or you want to clarify something about their accommodations, be sure that you don't make it apparent to the whole class that that's why you're talking to them. So you might just say, hey, Joe, can I speak to you after class? Students are not required to disclose their disability or diagnosis to you. So even when you're speaking to them in private, if you want to talk to them about their accommodation, you can't be like, well, I noticed that you have extended time on a test. Is that because you have ADHD or a learning disability? Like, we really can't ask them that. If the student chooses to self-disclose to you, that's fine, but you have to be careful to not ask them about that. And just think about when you're talking to a student who has a disability, like maybe you're having a class discussion and disability comes up. You want to make sure that you're not singling out a student with a disability and asking them perhaps to speak for all people with disabilities. If a student with a disability wants to speak up and lend information to the class about their disability or speak as a person with a disability, that's fine. But just like we wouldn't ask any member of another group to speak for the whole group, we want to make sure that we don't ask a student with a disability to do that. Again, we don't want to single out students with disabilities, and we don't want to out students with disabilities. Most of the students that are registered with the DRC have invisible disabilities, and their friends may not know that they have disabilities. But even the students who have visible disabilities, for example, a student who's in a wheelchair, we still want to be careful that we don't use them as a representative of all students with disabilities. Ableism. Ableism is a word you may not have heard before, but think of it just like any other ism. Racism, sexism, you get the point. Now, it may be deliberate or it could be completely inadvertent, but it could include slurs, jokes, ignoring the needs of a person with a disability. So for example, maybe if you decide that it's a nice day out and you want to take the class outside for a class meeting and you go to a place that's not wheelchair accessible. And you don't do it on purpose, but then you realize that not everybody in your class can participate. Denying the existence or validity of a disability. And this happens a lot with mental health disabilities. You know, people will say things like, well, if people would just exercise more, they wouldn't be depressed. And then outright discrimination. So I'm going to hand it over to John, who's going to talk a little bit more.
So just to give you an idea of some of the ableist terms that really turn up a lot in modern day language. And again, this is not an exhaustive list. Trying to avoid terms like "that's so crazy" or psycho, schizo, or spastic. I didn't realize, as a person who's from New York City, I didn't realize this was a thing until I moved up here, but try to avoid saying that someone rode the short bus. That's one that you hear a lot up in these parts. If you like things neat and clean, that's fine, but please don't describe yourself as so OCD. Handicapped. This one's a bit of a tough one because it's still being used a lot in the legal field. Like we still say handicap parking, but generally speaking, most people with disabilities don't like to be referred to as handicapped or having a handicap. It's considered outdated and insulting. Similarly, the R word. Mental retardation has not been the term that psychologists and psychiatrists have used to describe people for a while. So in case you're wondering, yes, the R word is a big insult, and no, it is not medically valid anymore. Similarly, for people with physical disabilities, crippled, don't call someone a cripple, don't say someone's crippled. And try to avoid using the term mute as well. We usually say something like nonverbal instead.
Can I just jump in for a second, John? I realized we didn't put it in here.
Yep.
And it's not actually an ableist term, but we didn't put in person first versus identity first.
Okay, so that is that's a good point.
I don't think it's on the next slide either, is it?
It's not in this one.
Okay.
So we don't have a slide for this, but let's quickly tell you about person first versus identity first language. It's a bit of a hot button issue with amongst people with disabilities. So person first language is what I just said, person with disabilities. Whereas identity first language would be saying a disabled person. Now, there are many groups, subcultures, and groups of marginalized people who have specific preferences. In the world of people with disabilities, it varies greatly. Some of us prefer person first language, so that we need to say people with disabilities to try and put the focus on the person and have the disability be an afterthought. Other people, however, prefer to put the identity first, to have the, as Carrie proudly raises her hand, Carrie prefers to put the identity of being disabled first, because that is an important part of her identity and who she is. And I personally am quite neutral on the term. I have trained myself to say people with disabilities or persons with disabilities, because that's what I found is the most, has the greatest amount of utility in my experience. But personally, as a person with multiple disabilities, I don't particularly care either way. So it's something to be aware of. You may run into students who you may say, can all the disabled students please remember that your tests will be at the center? And some student may come up to you and say, hey, I really don't appreciate that. Well, it's a bit of, it's hard to tell, but it is a matter of personal preference. So people with disabilities and disabled people are both pretty correct. And Carrie, do you have anything to add to that?
Just the one thing is that those of us in the disability community, regardless of which way we identify, are very big on able-bodied people not telling us how we identify. So I've had people who don't have disabilities tell me, oh, well, you can't say that you're a disabled person, you have to say you're a person with a disability. Well, no, my identity is that I'm a disabled person. And so for somebody else to tell me that I'm not is ableist. So just to honor whatever, just as we do with other people's identities, we honor how that person prefers to be identified, to make sure that you're honoring how the person with a disability prefers to be identified. So you may not know, and somebody may say, well, I prefer to be, you know, considered as a person with a disability or a person with a hearing loss as opposed to a deaf person. And just to honor that person's identity and to recognize that everybody has a different way that they prefer to identify. And you may not know that offhand, but when somebody acknowledges that that's their preferred identity, to make sure that that's what you're honoring.
Yeah, and I just realized, I didn't realize this until recently, Carrie, but I'm very open about having rather severe ADHD, but I don't like it when people say, oh, you're so ADD, even though I'm honest about my disability. I'm like, it's a condition I have, it's not a personality trait. And ADD itself has actually been removed from most diagnosis manuals. So yeah, so it's, as with any marginalized group, when dealing with people with disabilities, just be prepared to listen and understand what people in that community would prefer their language to reflect. Okay, so shifting gears a bit, we're now going to talk a little bit about what it's going to look like for you as an instructor or TA working with students with disabilities. So first off, you need to be notified that a student has a disability. No student has the right to walk in and just assume that their disability is going to be taken care of. So you as the instructor or your supervisor as the instructor has to be formally notified that a student has a disability and has accommodations. And the way that you will be notified is through an email from our office. Now, you may receive this email directly from the student, especially if you're the instructor, but if the instructor of record would like you to handle the situation, either as the head of their discussion segment or because they want a single point person, or maybe you're the only TA, they may ask you to handle it. So the letter may be forwarded by the instructor of record rather than coming directly from the student. Now, this is something that I can't stress enough. You are not obligated to take any action to accommodate any student with any disability until or unless you have a communication from our office. In fact, we do actually recommend that you don't accommodate students until you see that letter, because the student may intentionally or not misrepresent what they need, misrepresent the seriousness of the situation, and they may ask you for something that it isn't reasonable to grant. So it's so it's really a good idea to wait until you see that letter from us. And if you do, and you can say to the student, thank you for telling me, but I really do need to see the letter from the DRC about what accommodations we need to talk about. So wait until you see this letter. In a few cases, we will reach out to you or to the instructor of record directly, but that communication is going to happen through email in writing. So like I said, you either wait until you see this letter from us, and on the right of your screen, you'll see a sample of the accommodation letter. Or you wait either for this letter, or you wait for an email from us. Now you'll notice that the letter just has the student information, a bit of information about the legal reasons, and then down here it'll list the accommodations that the DRC has approved. We don't list the student's diagnosis because, as we already mentioned, the student's diagnosis is confidential. If a student self-discloses to you, that's fine, but in order to provide their accommodations, that's not something that the instructor or the TA necessarily needs to know. Now, if anything on the letter does not make sense to you, or if you understand what's going on, but you immediately realize that one of our suggested accommodations is not going to be feasible or reasonable in the class, please feel free to contact us. Our contact information is on this document. You have our emails, you have our direct emails, you have our fax number. Get in contact with us, and we are absolutely happy to explain to you our reasoning for some of these accommodations, or we are happy to help to work with you to help come up with alternatives that are reasonable and make sense in your class. Now, something that you should consider, especially if you have the fortune to design a class or teach a class for the first time, is to consider the concept of universal design. Universal design is an idea that just says design everything so that it's usable by the greatest number of people possible. And so one way to do this is, when you're distributing articles or weekly readings for students, be mindful of their readability and whether or not they're accessible to everybody. The best way to do this is to make sure that the reading is already prepared as a PDF and then upload it to Blackboard. Ally on Blackboard automatically runs an accessibility check, and it'll run optical character recognition, so that the document can be read by a screen reader. Now, the reason it has to go through this, I'm sure you've all seen it before. You'll get an article from your professor, and it's not actually like a neat document. It's pages photocopied from a textbook from the basement of the library that no one's actually pulled out of the library in 10 years. And so the point of OCR is so that it can go through this process so that the text can be renderable, which means it'll be accessible to a screen reader or text-to-speech software. And this process, used to be you had to submit them to us, but now the process is automatic through Blackboard. And the screenshot you see on the right of the image is an example of the different formats that Blackboard has available. So Blackboard gives students the option to download a document as an OCR PDF, as an HTML document, as an e-publication, electronic braille, audio, or even Beeline reader. So a lot of this is going to be built in for you, but we strongly, strongly recommend using Blackboard to help you. Whoop, excuse me. We strongly recommend using Blackboard to help you with your course accessibility and universal design. If you use social media in your classes, make sure you know how to make social media posts accessible. We are happy to help with that. Twitter has some really robust guidelines. Facebook has some really robust guidelines. Facebook's a little difficult to work with, but they'll do it. And YouTube's also got some great features. So if you are using any of these social media platforms in your classes, make sure that you know how to make posts accessible and that you do make your posts accessible. One other thing to think about is to be aware of color issues in captions and labels. And learn how to write them so that they're as easy to read for as many people as possible. For instance, make sure that everything is over a certain size font. Try and use high contrast. So you can see on this slide, Our headings are white writing on a very dark purple background that has a high level of contrast, and it's pretty readable because there's a contrast between the background and the typing. The rest of the slide is black lettering on a white background. That's also got some very high contrast. But if you were to say, take the same white background and put the text in yellow, that's going to be very difficult to read, even for a person with standard vision. And for a person who has any kind of vision issues, it's going to be even more difficult. So try and be aware of that. And one pro tip that Carrie actually taught me is that a white text with a black outline is readable on any background. So if you're creating something and you're not sure if it's accessible, make white text on a black background. It will pop out no matter what it's put in front of. Now, Carrie briefly mentioned the testing program. The testing program is probably where there's going to be the most intersection between your roles as graduate TAs and instructors and the DRC. So the vast majority of our students get testing accommodations, and our students get double the amount of time that most other students have. So if it's a 2-hour final, then our students will get 4 hours. If it's an hour-long test, they'll get 2 hours. If it's a 5-minute quiz, they'll get 10 minutes. Everything in between and beyond, whatever we call it, our students are going to be getting double time. Now, unfortunately, our only testing space is located in the campus center on the Uptown campus. So even if you're teaching on the East campus or the downtown campus, your student will have to come to the campus center on the Uptown campus in order to take their exam. If at all possible, please supply us with Scantrons. We do have a limited supply just in case, but since those have to be ordered centrally, we do have to always order extra. So if you can supply any Scantrons to us when you drop off the exams, please do. One thing I need to stress, and this is sort of an office policy, we do not use Blue Books for any reason. They don't scan properly. They don't fax properly. There's no way to make them work and get them to you safely unless you come and pick them up. And we've had so many problems that, unfortunately, I'm sorry, we're putting a kibosh on it. If you would like your students to record your answers in a Blue Book, we will respectfully decline and provide them with clean lined loose leaf paper. I'm very sorry, but that's what we've got to do. Now, if this sounds a little complicated and you're thinking, maybe I'll just provide the testing accommodations directly, that's fine. Technically, we are offering this testing program so that you don't have to, but please check with us to make sure that you're satisfying the students' accommodation needs. We've had professors before who are really trying to help and being as helpful as possible, but they provide the student with spaces that are not as non-distracting as our testing room, or they administer the time improperly, or there's some other issue. So if you'd like to offer the student testing accommodations through you or your department office, that is fine, but check with us just in case to make sure that everyone's on the same page. Now, a few do's and don'ts about testing in general. I cannot stress this enough. Students with disabilities may not be held to a different standard. We are providing the only accommodations to their testing that they need. You don't need to provide any additional accommodations. Instructors may not add more questions to fill a student's extended time. Instructors may not require that DRC students take the tests in the DRC office when other students may take the tests at home. If everyone in the class is taking it in the classroom, that's fine. But if everyone in the class is expected to take it at home, like in a remote or blended environment, then DRC students also take the exam at home. We don't just proctor the exam just because they have extended time. You may not increase the difficulty of an exam for a student with a disability. They get extended time for a reason. Increasing the difficulty will A, single them out, which is not legal, and B, also completely defeats the purpose. And one other thing that we have to recommend against, because the Office of Civil Rights has said that this is really not going to work, Don't try and get ahead of everything by increasing the amount of time that everyone takes. So if you have a test that you think is only going to take an hour, but you decide to give everyone 4 hours, that's great that you thought that way, but the Office of Civil Rights is going to say, no, you have to give the student with a disability 8 hours. So whatever the time limit is for the class, it's doubled just for the students with the disability. We appreciate you trying to universally design it, but Office of Civil Rights says, no, we can't do that. Now, if at all possible, please avoid creating a version of the test that we only give to DRC students, and give DRC students the same mix of versions that you do in the classroom. Don't create a designated version just for the DRC. And if please don't write DRC version or disabled version at the top. We've had that happen. That is another civil rights complaint waiting to happen. All right, so in terms of the logistics of how the program works, to get the exams to us, you will need to email the test to DRC test coordinator at albany.edu. That is our designated testing email. If at all possible, avoid sending it to our general email or to any of our personal accounts. The DRC test coordinator email is the official email specifically for testing. We are also planning on allowing you to upload it to our online data system, Accommodate, and you will get the instructions on how to do that when you get the students' accommodations letters. No matter what method you use, please provide all special instructions and all necessary information. If you don't give us any instructions otherwise, we will assume that the test is closed book, closed notes, that no calculator is allowed, that no outside materials are allowed, and that all materials that are being used must be turned into the proctor. If you let your students take the exam questions home, if they're allowed to bring a cheat sheet, if they're allowed a certain type of calculator, that's absolutely fine. But please tell us, because unless we hear it from you, we are not going to let the student use those extra materials or those non-standard testing conditions. We need to hear that from you. So if you email it to us, make it clear in the email instructions what you'd like us to do. You can also drop off the exam in person. This service is suspended during periods of official lockdown, as we have been for the past 15 months. But you're always welcome to come to our office in Campus Center 130 and drop it off in person, and then you can verbally convey your instructions to us when you drop off the exam. If you trust the student, you can also send the exam to us in a sealed envelope, and the student can just bring it with them. We will accept that for you as long as the envelope's sealed. But please, oh please, do not send the exam through campus mail. This has happened too many times. The exam has arrived the day after the student is supposed to take it. We love the guys down in the we love everyone down in the mailroom, but unfortunately, we just can't take the chance. So please only drop it off in person or email it to us. Now, to get the exam back, we will scan and email the test back to you as soon as possible after the student is completed. If you don't hear back from us within a week, you can follow up with us, but we usually get it out as quickly as possible. We'll then send the original test back to your office through campus mail because we have very limited storage space in our office. This is the only time we'll use campus mail. And again, we will only send it to you through campus mail because we've already scanned the original and emailed it to you. You are also welcome to pick up the exam in person. Again, this is suspended during lockdowns. Or if you trust the student, we will seal the envelope as best as we can, and we will send it back to the student to deliver it to the classroom or to your department. But once again, we will not just send it through campus mail. If you want it through campus mail, we will email it first and then send it through campus mail. So we realized that was probably a huge information bombardment there. So at this point, we are happy to take any questions that you may have.